Hey parents, do you ever feel like you are stuck in this loop dealing with that same emotional baggage? I know I do. Well, our guest today, Dr. Ray Doctor, has some fresh insights on healing that will forever change how you look at growth and healing. It's all about moving just beyond, he's all about moving just beyond managing system. He's all about moving beyond just managing some. He's all about moving just beyond managing those symptoms to actually rewriting your story and finding real, lasting healing. I'll see you inside. Let's jump in, my friends. Let's jump into it. Let's jump in. Welcome back to Fulfillment Therapy. Today we have an incredible special guest with us. Dr. Ray Doctor is here, and I'll share a little bit about your bio in a minute, but I just wanted to say welcome and thank you for coming on the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you very much. I'm very excited about this share.
Good. Well, I'm going to share a little bit, but why don't I go ahead and start with your bio? It's pretty amazing hearing a little bit about yourself, reading about you. You have been a coach for over 28 years, and you have a doctorate in clinical psychology, and you've worked with more than 6,000 clients and shared the stage with figures like Marianne Williamson, Eckhart Tolle, things like that. And you have a best-selling book called All It Takes Is One, which helps people unlock their potential. That's amazing. I don't know if you could.
By the way, I forgot to bring the book so many times. And so now I just have one sitting right here.
That's amazing. And then you've also been on things like Psychology Today and the Los Angeles Times. So we're really excited to have you on the show and to pick your brain a little bit and hear about your expertise. But yeah, is there anything I didn't share that you'd like to share about your background or things that you've...
No. I mean, I'm a father. Maybe that's one thing. A father, so maybe that'll help a little bit.
How many kids do you have?
Just one.
Yeah, just one.
And a step one also. That's kind of my girlfriend has a child also. We're all very close. So I kind of see him like a son as well. So.
Oh, awesome. I love that. Well, yeah, I have plenty of questions that I could ask you, but specifically today we are talking about, well, the title is Beyond the Scars. Is it possible to heal our wounds forever? And you are going to speak to this a little bit and also about your book and the things that will help our listeners. So our listeners are predominantly parents seeking to improve their mental health and wellness and their fulfillment. And the first question I have for you is, do you believe someone can heal from PTSD permanently?
Absolutely. And I have witnessed it many times, not just 5 times, 50 times, but probably well over 500 times.
Wow. Can you share, I know it's a little bit early, but can you give me a quick example of a time that was just maybe even surprising to you of that level of healing that you saw?
Yes, I worked with a man who had witnessed a person basically dying, and what had happened was this man was at the Santa Monica Farmers Market. And a older lady was driving her vehicle. She should have surrendered her driver's license. She lost control and hit a bunch of people. Oh, no. And one particular person was injured, and he happened to be there, and he rushed to this person, was holding this woman, and she died in his arms. So this person was experiencing PTSD, but it wasn't from what you think. What had happened is that he sought coaching or first therapy and it didn't work. Then he found me. I'm not saying therapy doesn't work, but if a person's not specialized in treating trauma, they probably shouldn't be working with that person. That's just my belief. And because just talking about that could be contraindicated. You know what I mean? It just kicks up that stuff. So it's very important to remember that anyone who has PTSD, that you have to approach it from a somatic perspective, such as before you start working with that person, it might be simply, we're going to imagine that there is a pond here. And I want you to imagine that it's actually really cold, but it's not going to hurt you. It's not dangerous. If you were to just stick your big toe into water and you know you have full control of that, then maybe you have the ability to slowly submerge the rest of your body. And I will bring a client to that perspective of where that I want you to imagine, just like when I ask you questions that you don't have to share, you have control over them. And just like your big toe going into the pond, I want you to think of it in the same way where you do this when you're ready. Just that alone is going to prepare a client to kind of go, I don't have to go all the way, okay? Because when people go through some traumatic experience, they are bombarded by police, family members, nurses, doctors, friends, all of that. And typically they feel very spun out, and it's very uncomfortable, and it makes it worse. So it's a breath of fresh air for them when someone is approaching them from this container which they feel like they're collaborating with. So that alone creates a level of safety and participation on their part, and you really want them to participate. So that's the first step of like creating that container. So when I met with this gentleman, I went through that process also. And what had happened was, first off, we were using the technique EMDR, okay? That's eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And I'm really happy I was able to say that with all the syllables, because no one ever understood me. And I'm sure people are asking, like, what did he say? Just EMDR, okay? And what happened was we started to process what had happened. And what was interesting is that he went all the way back to the Gulf War, where his platoon was ambushed and he was the only survivor. He had prior trauma that was unhealed. So look at the correlation to everyone died but me. The guilt of that, to here, I couldn't help this woman either. Okay? So a lot of times what will happen when a person who's been traumatized wants to work on themselves and heal that, practitioners too much on the actual event to the details of that versus the interpretation that the victim took away from that, especially days after to years after. Because if it's being interpreted as I must have been wrong, it could have been better, or there's confusion, it's never integrated. And what's not integrated typically shows up in our life as health issues, like digestive issues. It shows up in our life where a woman who had been perpetrated, she's getting a massage, and then the safe male therapist goes by her thighs, and all of a sudden it kicks up the cellular memory, and she doesn't know why. We all have this in our body. And if we don't make sense of what had happened to us, in the worst case scenario, it turns into PTSD. The body's just looping through an experience that still does not make sense to the client. And that's it. So to break it down in a simple way is we are there to help them make sense of the event where they feel in control. They did all that they could do. And not just that, is that they have the ability to integrate the new learning and then take it into action. And that is to become that new version that's healed. And you don't have to be completely healed, but it's more where, just as an example, a person might be afraid to go outside their front door. And in this experience, you might have the person just walk around in their lawn and to connect to nature and in that space where they feel safe. But I would want them to try something new. And back to this gentleness, in my book, I talk about locating just one belief, one hidden belief. And if you do, that might solve all the problems in your life. So I'll tell you what the hidden beliefs this man had, and it was this. I couldn't help these people. Why was I in that position to experience that? There must be something here that I'm supposed to learn and do. But those two beliefs were based in the idea that he was supposed to play God, that was supposed to work out differently, rather than that in the last moments of that woman's death in his arms, she was being held by care and love by him.
That's amazing.
Major reframing.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah, yes. And in the platoon, when that happened, it was also the reframing that everyone signed the same application to be in the military. Therefore, they were there on their own free will, knowing all the risks involved. You know, that is as well, to even him taking it back to himself, to how he felt. I was afraid. I was scared. I didn't know what I was doing. I felt out of control. Just his raw feelings. That alone, and recognize he did everything, and him too felt like a victim. Him too felt out of control. Him too didn't know what to do. He recognized, oh, I was just like her. I was just like my men, but I happened to survive. So how am I going to take this out to the world in a positive way to hold space for other people who might suffer with PTSD? And that's what he did. It went away.
That is incredible. So if I understand you correctly, it sounds like you really help clients rewrite that narrative. And I love how you said that, locate the hidden belief. I don't think I've heard it in quite that way before. Mm-hmm. So it is about that interpretation. Is it okay if I ask you a personal question?
And by the way, this was only 2 sessions.
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
Yes.
I do love EMDR, and I love that you do that trauma work. But your example specifically made me think about my daughter, she's just a senior in high school. And she actually, on the way home from homecoming, I believe, they were the first responders, the first ones there. They just happened to see somebody get hit by a car. And they were there when this person, the person didn't die right there, but shortly thereafter. And she has had enough health things where she saw somebody almost die several times. And she's just, anyway, so in this situation, what would you say to like someone like my daughter, or maybe it's a listener that has had something else? Like right now, we're just talking about health issues, but how can they find healing? Maybe they can't come see you. What do they do to take that next step?
Well, specifically with the idea of almost watching someone die, what would come to mind is, what is her relationship to death? What is her relationship to what happens after this? And what you'll discover with many people is that what's being triggered is their unknown or feelings about death. They haven't asked questions to themselves about their own mortality. If they're not on their purpose and they're not really happy with their life, then seeing someone die can trigger the idea that, I didn't finish what I was supposed to do on earth. And so those are the common triggers. So I would just go there as an example. My son is 10 and he has a very comfortable relationship with death. At least that's my projection. Saw me go through the death of my mother, his grandmother, and my father, his grandfather. And he did see me cry, but he also saw me move forward and still become healthy. And my parents saw death as like part of living. They saw it as, like death is just part of like being human. And as an example, I remember being with my brother and his Chinese wife, and she didn't have that relationship to death. And it was Thanksgiving, I think. Let's pretend it was Thanksgiving. And I think my dad just brought up in a very random way, when I get buried, I want to make sure that he was like talking about his funeral arrangements. And she had this look on her face like, you guys talk about this as like, as just as casual as, hey, do you want a bun? Do you want to? But my parents approached it from that perspective. My dad was Jewish. My mom is Buddhist. We celebrated death and dying as part of living, as part of life. So therefore, even though I cried, even though it hurt, it didn't get stuck with some idea that didn't belong, or my own unresolved issues with death. And then also I have had 2 near-death experiences. So you would hope that I don't have any death anxiety, but that as well. So even with that experience of crossing over, I'm able to approach death from that kind of more fun perspective. It's just a change. It's a shift. That's all it is.
Oh, I love that. And I think it does, there's a part of that that does go back to rewriting the narrative and exploring that on a deeper level.
Yes.
But going back to even just this topic, another question I have for you is, once someone moves beyond identifying maybe as a victim, whether it's the situation that you told of your experience or my daughter or whatever it is, what steps do you think would be helpful for them to rewrite their narrative toward maybe empowerment or lasting recovery?
I'll use your daughter as an example. Do you know her inside out and how she would communicate if you were to communicate for her?
I sure hope so, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. So let's do some role play.
Okay.
So what happened? And just give me the snapshots.
Okay. I was coming home from homecoming, and my date and I were driving by, and we saw this guy get hit. We got out and we helped him, and it was like he was really disoriented, and I was really scared. I didn't know what to do. The ambulance came, but
So right there, I would stop her in a moment, I'm listening to for something. And by the way, I wouldn't be this abrupt with an actual client. Hey, wait, stop. We're just doing this for the sake of brevity. What is it? What is your relationship with feeling out of control and not knowing what to do?
I guess there's been a lot of times when I felt that way when it comes to my health, or I watched my little sister stop breathing too. It's been
Yeah. And I would go deeper with her and I'd say, what thoughts did you have about yourself? Such as, what did this sort of happen to me to even, I feel guilty thinking about myself rather than focusing on my sister. To even having those thoughts when you saw this person. And this is a true thought that comes up for some people. And that is, I'm not glad it's them, but there is that thought of I'm glad I'm not in that position. Not that they're glad that the person is hurt or injured or whatever. You know what I mean? But he was up. And it's hard to take responsibility for that. I must be a bad person to have that thought. So back to you, what comes through your body when you hear those questions? How did I feel about myself in a situation? How was I talking positively or negatively?
I think I was afraid I was going to mess it up. I think I was scared that everything's unsafe, but also I can't help.
Again, repeat that. I
can't help.
And again.
I can't help.
And again.
I can't help.
Yeah. And in that moment, I probably would have her close her eyes and I would have her really drop into her heart. And I would say, how do you know you didn't help? How didn't you know that this man was looking at an angel? Just because he looked disoriented doesn't mean that his soul was looking at you. Just because you didn't know what to do, it didn't mean that you were not doing anything. And so it would go into conversation where she might say why am I playing God?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, would you agree that you wanted to help because you're a loving person? At the end of the day, wouldn't you say that the reason why you felt maybe a little hopeless because you felt as though you were supposed to have a manual on how to save a person who got a car accident? And then she'd probably say yes, and then it would go to. So if there is nothing but positivity in this, and that you showed up at the perfect time, like a divine appointment, what were the positive thoughts you had? What is it that you really wanted for him? Meaning, I couldn't do something, but go into your heart, and her heart would probably say, I want you to feel better. I want you to feel love. I want you to know that you're not alone. And all of that. And she would say all those things, and I'd say, I want you to repeat those things, close your eyes, and say those things to yourself. that would probably bring down tears. She'd feel that fuzzy feeling. And then I might interject something kind of a little out there like, so what are you going to do for fun today? It's a pattern disruption. Like, kind of like, because you got to get on with life anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that deep work. And again, changing that storyline, and then almost like towards the end, that post-traumatic growth, that like, what now? And what did I learn from that, leaning forward? That's beautiful. Thank you for
what we become is everything. What we become is everything.
Yeah. And you can see how that can totally shift the trajectory of her life moving forward then, because if she's operating under this assumption that like, it's not safe, I didn't help, I can't help, you know, like how that can shape her life. But then if you intervene here and you shift that narrative, what that does for her actions moving forward, how she moves on past her senior year, right? Or with your client.
Yes. And there's a common word that's used for everything now, and that's safety. And it's primarily emotional safety. It's not usually physical safety. I would explore what that means for her. Like, in other words, everything she did in that experience should have been the container for emotional safety. However, if she has thoughts that she thinks that she's not supposed to have, if she feels like she should feel a different way, or if she creates the narrative, it's not safe to feel out of control, or it's not safe to be authentically confused, then she herself is somewhat self-sabotaging with that negative narrative. Therefore, she's creating experience she's not safe because she is creating those thoughts and feelings, not that person or her or the date.
Right.
Did you follow that? So if we feel safe, no matter where we are, that we can speak, you know, however we want, then there's never that issue with where we have to set up a container for someone else to hold space for us. Of course, if we're in a meeting and we want to change something, of course, we're in a co-partner, co-parent situation. We want there to be calmness to direct something in a positive way. However, emotional safety is an inner job. Emotional safety is an inner job. Others can only somewhat influence a little bit. Others can only somewhat abide to it with the boundaries. But still, even when others do that for a person who doesn't feel safe, somehow they'll create an experience where they're either victimized or feel unsafe because they showed up feeling unsafe.
Yeah. And I'm sure what listeners are probably asking themselves is like, oh, this sounds like awesome, but like, I feel so stuck myself. Like, how do I feel emotionally safe? Or maybe even if you would bring in concepts from your book or something that would help, like, how can they begin to heal if they don't have you there, or maybe they don't have a therapist? Like, how do they address this?
So here's a one section in my book that is very simple, and it kind of spells out, but it's so simple, but I know it makes sense for most people listening or watching us. And it's this: I think we agree that most of our wounds come from maybe feeling like we were not loved, right? I think that most of us feel our wounds based off of relationships that didn't make sense. Maybe they were toxic. To that, we agree that if we had support in a better way by others, maybe this trauma or what we had went through would have been a better experience, and we would be able to integrate this. So it goes all back to relationships. Well, if the relationships you had when you were traumatized were not supportive, listen to that. If the relationships you were in, meaning mom, dad, brother, if they were still jerks or telling you it was your fault, or they're the same people that you were in conversation with when you were younger, then when we go through trauma, we're still playing out our childhood. We're still playing out unhealed things that happened to us when we were children. So even a very simple process which doesn't seem directly related to PTSD, is this one little exercise I call Return to Love exercise. And it's 10 questions. And a person is supposed to free associate, to say first thing that comes to mind and write it down, such as love means, they fill it out. My family taught me that love meant, I received love when I didn't receive love when I needed my parents to love when and you go down this list, and here are some of the answers. Love means I will get hurt. Oh, sorry, I fast forward. These are the examples I had. Love equals pain to me. My family taught me that love has to be earned. I received love when I achieved good grades. I disagreed with my parents. I craved my parents' love when I was in college. I sought love when my father remarried. I wished for love when I felt ashamed. When you see this list, there's an exercise you are to do to reframe it. So it turns into this. Love means I'll get hurt becomes I am safe to receive and give love. My family taught me that love must be earned becomes I am loved unconditionally. I received love when I got good grades becomes I receive love every day because I am love. I didn't receive love when I disagreed with my parents becomes I am authentic and loved for who I am. I craved my parents' love when I was in college becomes all my life's experiences have shaped me into the loving person I am today. I could keep going on and on. Now you can see this is building confidence. This is also indirectly showing a person how they actually might have a skewed perception of what love actually is. It might be more conditional.
Yeah.
Okay. As an example, I worked with a client who said, my mother loved me so much that she would never let me take the school bus. I couldn't stay the night at my friend's house. She was always there. Of course, the other parents hearing this might say, it sounds like kind of a helicopter parent, and yet this man had associated this to love to where we went a little deeper, and she had a miscarriage before him. And so when she got pregnant with him, she was carrying all this unhealed trauma from the miscarriage. And so she was overprotective to where she projected her own fears onto her son, which she taught him that this is what love was. And it wasn't. So he was one of those guys who would smother his girlfriends. And that's why he was coming to me. He's a cleanie, but he was picking up on the modeling from his mother. And so he thought that this was showing love, and he was always in his partner's space. So, and I'm not judging any parents. I mean, she also was just kind of repeating what she saw and experienced. And we have a tendency, this is why we say, you need to heal generational trauma, because it gets just passed on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I love people that focus on that. Sorry, I interrupted you. What were you saying?
Oh, no, you didn't. No. And so back to what you shared and you asked the original question is like, if there's going to be people listening to this and they're going to say, how do I get unstuck? I guarantee that if you get clarity with what love is right now and not based on what had happened, meaning the trauma, your parents, and just unmet expectations, you're going to be further along in the direction you're healing, because what you're doing is that you are self-empowering yourself. You're reframing negative situations into something positive that works for you. And therefore, you'll have a more positive lens to look at what you feel is unhealed. If you're looking at what is unhealed from a distorted perspective, an outdated paradigm, or just something that's just not real or true or really connects you, it's just not going to work.
Absolutely. I love that you were able to break that down into small things that we can do or listeners can do. So get clarity on love, reframe, and that paradigm or that perspective shift that we can take. And it sounds like they can go to your book, All It Takes Is One, and that's in one of those chapters you said, there's that exercise.
Yes. The book was written in a way where it's in the beginning, it gets into case studies, and then it gets into what had happened, and it goes right into the juice of how to, within a second chapter or third chapter, you're doing exercises. It's a book plus work, I could say a workbook.
I love that. And so that's definitely something they can do, whether you're there in person or not. They can get your book, break it down, do some of those exercises, and live more proactively and do those steps that will help them bring healing into their lives. Because likely we've all, like, we know this, right? We've all had things in our lives or narratives that are going on that continue to affect us and prevent our quality of life of being what it could be. And I just really love those examples that you gave and talking us through it. But my last question for you is just something simple and small. What's one little thing that listeners can do to heal their past wounds, like maybe even beyond what you said, but also increase their fulfillment? That doesn't feel so daunting or intimidating. Beyond what you said, is there anything else that comes to mind?
I would love to speak to most of your audience and to know what is like the main scar or the common trauma that you hear. What is that? I can use that example.
Well, so many of them are very overwhelmed parents, but they have a lot of anxiety and depression or overwhelm. Like they put themselves last. They're running on fumes. They're just worn out, and they've put everything on hold and trying to figure out who they are and why they don't have that greater satisfaction with life.
So we were talking about, are these women, some mothers?
Parents, typically more women than not. But
yeah, more mothers. Okay. And is this a separate conversation from their trauma? Like, meaning if this was not, say, a podcast, that could we easily transition into the conversation about parenting?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I was more curious about like what it is that I want to know if it's almost like I'm asking, are they traumatized by their parenting? Or they have unhealed trauma and therefore parenting is far more difficult. See, like
Yeah, I would say it's the second one. Like they don't always have the self-awareness, but most of them, like all of us, carry wounds that they're not really necessarily aware of. But I mean, I can't speak for all of them collectively, but there's like a lot of abuse that hasn't been even acknowledged or worked through. There's neglect, even if it's just like emotional neglect from their parents growing up, or, like a myriad of issues. But I would say that is a big one. And then trying to create that control in their lives. And then they have all this anxiety currently and depression. But yeah, I know they're...
All right, I can speak to that. I'm going to give I hope I can spit out a bunch of examples. Okay, let's see. I'll go on my side gate to see what's there. Okay. I'm going to give you a bunch of examples. Okay. So first one is my partner, Nicole, her co-partner never had his father around. Like he just was absent. So he was primarily raised by his mother, who would hide herself in her bedroom and just give him like money to go buy whatever. And he was buying Twinkies and all this junk food. And of course, he developed a bunch of gut issues later in his adulthood. However, they have a son. And to compensate for his father not being there, he had the idea that he always had to be engaged and interested in what his son wants, to where he's always there. I mean, his lifestyle and work gives him the ability to do that. So they're 50-50. But when their son goes to him, like he is just there all the time. And it's not sustainable for my partner, Nicole, who's an entrepreneur who works, more hours. And what that developed in the child was like codependency, to where she's following her around, like not know what to do when he has everything to do there at the house. And so she's trying to teach him, that how to be independent. So there's nothing bad. There's no judging. It's more that he's practicing, or like, let's say the father was overcompensating for something that's still unhealed or unknown, or he doesn't know how to parent yet. She had a conversation with him. He shifted that, and it's making things a little bit able to do is pass on to the child that this reality experience that, when you want someone, they just show up, entitlement. And so he needs to develop an experience of the real world that Sometimes people will accept you and sometimes people will reject you. Sometimes people will be there and sometimes people will not. That's what it means to be a human. But he carried anxiety when he was not able to do that. The father. That's a very subtle thing. Now imagine that. He might say, God, parenting is a really tough job. No, is it really tough? Or how you create the emotions within yourself because you feel guilty that you can't always be engaged.
Right.
Yep.
Which is something I think most parents can relate to because there's so much guilt for not giving more and more and more, but then you see the detrimental effects from your example.
Okay, so another example. I know there's women here who, what their interpretation of their childhood is that they're always told no. And the difference is this, is that when your parent told you no, they just said because there was no transparency. It was just no. And they seemed angry. Whereas you as a parent, if you were to say no, you'd probably actually give an explanation like because it's too late and you're going to be wired on sugar. You know, we're, I think, up level from generations prior. However, if a parent has unhealed trauma and she interprets the word no from a negative lens from what she experienced in her childhood, which is different, meaning like her father just said no and just walked away, just totally gaslighted. She might not have that clarity. Therefore, when she is telling her child no, she feels in her body. That's the overwhelm. Oh my God, I don't want, my daughter or son to experience what I experienced in my childhood. So being the one who is setting boundaries and having more discipline, that itself, having boundaries and exercising discipline can be really difficult because of that unhealed idea that no equals bad. No equals I'm going to be sitting with these bad emotions for a really long time. Yeah. And so that is another example of how that could show up. So you might ask that parent, what's parenting like? Oh my God, it's exhausting. Is it exhausting or the parenting role you're playing? That container you're holding and you constantly triggering yourself with your unhealed stuff and then still having to move into the masculine, get the child to school in time and then go to work and pushing that shit down. Oh my God, that's got to be exhausting. But the task in hand isn't that challenging. The words you're communicating are clear. You do love your child are not that difficult, but it's how you interpret it. It's what you allow yourself to feel that can really make you feel exhausted.
Absolutely. So again, tying right back into that, finding that clarity, reframing, getting that perspective shift, because that can really change how you show up in your life and how you view things, how you're going to make that shift, rewrite that narrative. So yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Well, we really appreciate you coming on the show today. I love your insights. I love that there's little things like I hadn't heard before. I already mentioned that, like locate the hidden belief. Now that can be hard for us if we don't have a lot of self-awareness, but it sounds like in your book, we're able to do a lot of those exercises ourselves and maybe create a greater self-awareness. So if listeners want to go and find that, can you tell us like where we can find you and if your book is on Amazon, all of those things? Do you mind sharing?
So my book is in like 35,000 retailers. So if you want to buy it from a store, you can just order it there. I'm sure they can get it if you don't want to pay Amazon's shipping. I know some people are like, I don't want to put more money into Amazon. I've heard that, but it is on Amazon as well. And then my website is a great way to get to me, and that is raydoktor.com. So it's my real name, raydoktor.com. That is a way to find me. And there are links to my YouTube channel and other things I have coming up. Pretty soon, I'm going to be doing a relationship group process. We're going to launch that in about a month. And we'll be doing a lot of like low entry workshops that people can kind of learn how to do this stuff. And if people want to know what it is, I think we're just going to do it for like online 90-minute workshop for $22. Oh, wow. That's it. Oh yeah. Yeah. It's a very low, as you know, as a coach, or therapists, it's kind of like people have to enter at their own pace. And I know people, they might hear my voice and they might think, oh, this guy, he might know what he's talking about, but I need to still trust him. I still need to trust him. So this group is for people to see me coaching in real time with different people, because we really know how a person shows up when they're in it, right?
Absolutely.
When they're in it. So that's what this group circle that we're forming is about, to really have that experience, to see what is possible, to rewrite your script and to live a better life.
That's beautiful. Well, it's the perfect place to stop. And I'll make sure to put your links and everything in the show notes so they can check it out, maybe check out your workshops. And I appreciate you coming on to help us understand how we can take our fulfillment and life to the next level. So thank you so much. And I appreciate you coming.
Thank you. All right. Thank you.